we're going to talk federal government. We're going to do this in 10 minutes, so rewatch this if you need it. So the federal government is made up specifically of 3 branches of government: the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. So we're going to start at the executive and move south. The executive branch, because we are still part of the Commonwealth, the executive branch at the very head is the Queen of Canada, also the Queen of England. Below the Queen is the Governor General. The Governor General is the Queen's representative here in Canada. Both these roles are very ceremonial. They don't have any real power in making laws, etc. However, because we are still a parliamentarian with a head of government that is the Queen, the Governor General still has to sign off on every law that gets passed. So when the legislature, which does most of the law passing, when they pass the laws, the Governor General in the end actually does have to sign them, otherwise it doesn't become a law. The Governor General always signs them, no real power. Okay, so below the Governor General is somebody you will recognize. That's our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister, which currently is Stephen Harper, our Prime Minister is the head of government, makes all the major decisions. Now, below the Prime Minister is what's called the Cabinet. It's called the Cabinet. Now, the Cabinet is made up of a whole bunch of members of Parliament. We'll get to members of Parliament in a second. But it's made up of approximately 30 members of Parliament. Now, these 30 members of Parliament, each of them are called ministers, Cabinet ministers. Now, what they do is there's 30 of them. So, imagine there's 30 lines. There's 30 of them. Each of them has a portfolio. Each of them takes care of one section of running Canada. So these 30 people, we split Canada into 30 different concerns or sections. So, for example, you'll have the Cabinet Minister or the Minister of Defense. Fairly self-explanatory. The Minister of Defense is in charge of defending Canada, security, etc. You'll have the Minister of Finance. You have the Minister of Finance in charge of the financial ups and downs of the economy, etc. Oh, sorry, I thought my time was up. Minister of Finance, in charge of our monies. You'll have the Minister of Fisheries, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. You'll have Minister of Education, Minister of Healthcare. You'll have all these different ministers who are each in charge of a different section of Canada's political structure. So if there is some law that is going to get passed on fisheries, then this minister is in charge of passing that law, of usually introducing it. These people here, these men and women right here, including the Prime Minister, notice ministers, Prime Minister, the first of the ministers. So these ministers and the Prime Minister, they're the ones who propose laws. They propose laws each dealing with their section. So the Defense Minister is the one who proposes laws about how best to defend Canada. The Minister of Agriculture proposes laws that would best serve the farmers of Canada or the ranchers of Canada. Aboriginal Affairs would propose laws that deal with how does the government and Aboriginal people, how do they get along, or what kind of relationship do they have. Laws would come from there. These guys and women, they produce laws. They propose laws. But they don't pass laws. That is up to the legislative branch of government. Now, the legislative branch of government has 308 members. Each member is elected from a part of Canada. All right. So you've heard about ridings and constituencies. Canada is split up into constituencies and ridings. They're synonymous. So you can call them constituencies, you can call them ridings, it doesn't matter. Labrador probably has like 3, Newfoundland has a whole bunch, etc. So each of these sections each have about 120,000 people. So I'm estimating it. Like I just drew these lines, but each section of Canada is split up into 120,000 people chunks. So for example, Calgary has 1.2 million people. 1.2 million divided by 120,000 equals 10. So Calgary has approximately 10 members of parliament, or MPs, representing the people of Calgary. Calgary has 10 MPs because each member of parliament represents about 120 people. Each riding constituency has 120,000 people approximately. All right, so these constituencies elect one person to represent them. So different parts of Labrador will have different MPs represent different parts of Labrador, and those people make up the legislature. They make up the legislative branch, or part of the legislative branch. 308, that means Canada is split into 308 sections because we have 308 members. Each member represents a section of Canada. The cabinet ministers are part of this 308. The prime minister is part of this 308. The prime minister is a member of parliament. The cabinet ministers are members of parliament. Okay, so we have the legislature. Let's look at that. We call the legislature the House of Commons. This is what the House of Commons looks like. All right? So this, I hope you can see this. This is what the House of Commons looks like. You'll have a seat in the middle. That is not where the Prime Minister sits. That's where the Speaker of the House sits. He is not a member of Parliament. He's just the moderator. We also have a whole bunch of chairs. Whole bunch of chairs. Here, yes. This is where the Prime Minister sits. So the Prime Minister sits here, and he is part of the Conservatives right now. So all the Conservatives sit here. Each seat represents a part of Canada. So this seat here might be Calgary West. This seat here might be Ottawa South. This one here is Chestermere. This one here, this seat here is, doesn't matter. That's Grand Prairie, right? So each seat represents a part of Canada. And the person who represents that part of Canada sits in those seats, etc. We always group the parties together, so all the Conservatives sit here. Now, the Conservatives have more than 50%. This is 50% of the chairs. They have more than 50%, so they get these 50% of the seats, plus a few seats in this section here. And that makes up the Government of Canada. That's our head of government. Then you'll have the NDP. The NDP will sit here. You'll have the few Liberals. You'll have the Bloc Québécois. You'll have one seat for the Green Party, one seat for perhaps an independent. Independent meaning that they don't have a party. They got voted in for who they are as an individual. So you'll have a few independents. You'll have a Green Party member. You'll have etc. etc. So that's how the House of Commons is broken up through its MPs. So the Conservatives right now, the Conservatives have more than 50% of the House of Commons. How do bills get passed? How do bills become laws? So, going back, the Cabinet Minister. Let's say the Cabinet Minister of Agriculture wants to dissolve the wheat board. So right now, every farmer who sells wheat or grains gives it to one big pool, and then the government actually sells that wheat to international bodies. Let's say the Minister of Agriculture wants to get rid of that practice. They want to dissolve the wheat board. Get rid of the wheat board. Now farmers can sell to whomever they want. They don't have to give it to the government and the government sells it. They can sell it to whoever they want privately. So, Minister of Agriculture proposes a law. It gets sent to the House of Commons. The House of Commons reads it over. It gets read out loud. The Minister of Agriculture reads it out loud. Oh, we're going to dissolve the wheat board. There's a little bit of talking, but this isn't the stage where they start arguing. This is where you vote on whether or not we should look into this further. First reading. It's called the first reading. In the first reading, you just look at it and you decide whether you want to read it some more, look into it. So you vote. Now you can see that the Conservatives have more than 50% of the seats. So even if everybody who's not a Conservative votes against the Minister of Agriculture, as long as the Conservatives, who the Minister of Agriculture is a Conservative member, he or she is a member of Parliament for the Conservative Party. The Cabinet is made up of the Prime Minister's party. So the Cabinet Ministers are all made up of Conservatives. The Prime Minister is a Conservative. if they all vote with their people, so they all vote for the Minister of Agriculture's plan, then it passes. It passes. So 60% vote yes. What happens is now this bill, this bill then goes to a committee. It goes to a committee. Now the committee is made up of specialists in agriculture. So you'll have, maybe the Minister of Agriculture will be there. You'll have men and women who represent agricultural interests. So you'll have someone from the Wheat Board, maybe 2 people from the Wheat Board. You'll have 3 people who are part of farming unions, or like a representative that the farmers have sent to represent farmers' interests. You'll have maybe someone from finance, because anything that happens in agriculture affects Canadian finances. So you'll have the Minister of Finance will send someone. Perhaps you'll even have the Minister of the Environment. The Minister of the Environment will send someone, because whatever happens to farming that might affect the environment will send someone. You'll have specialists, people who know about international wheat trade, people who know about local wheat trading, people who know about weather patterns and such, and how this will affect long-term growth of wheat in Canada and the viability for the future, etc., etc. So the committee is made up of specialists in the field that the bill came from. The bill came from agriculture, specialists in agriculture. They will look through it and make changes. They will make plenty of changes. So once they make a whole bunch of changes, it goes back to the House for second reading. It'll go back to the House for second reading. Now you'll get more arguing. Now people will say, well, I don't like the changes that were made, or I like these changes, I don't like these changes. This will affect my constituency. I live in Grand Prairie. I was elected from Grand Prairie, and Grand Prairie does not want to get rid of the Wheat Board, so I am against it. And so they'll argue back and forth, and they will suggest new changes. They'll suggest new changes. So after second reading, they'll propose a whole bunch of changes. They'll vote on it again. Now this isn't to see if it will pass as a law. It's to vote to see if it should go back to committee for more changes, or if it can go to third reading, which is the final reading and when it becomes law. So they vote on it. Let's say they vote that it should go back to committee. Fine. So it goes back to committee. Committee maybe makes some of the changes that were suggested. Usually that does happen. Usually there's 2 sets of changes. Then it comes back. Now this is where things get a little interesting, because now another group of people get to look at it when it comes back.